The August 6th work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Felico, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Present.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Very interesting.
You said present. I thought I'd shake.
We have on items for City Council meeting of August 9th, 2018, Council review. Mr. Trivett, anything you'd like to highlight?
We're going to be kicking off our GIO process with the report from the National Citizen Survey and accepting the goals, initiative, and outcomes schedule for the process of developing the GIOs. We've also got a fire truck procurement, a new exemption from personal property tax, and a new MOU with the Housing Authority.
Questions for Mr. Trivett?
No, sir. No, sir.
No. This takes us to the public comment section. Anybody who would like to speak to council regarding any of the items on Thursday's agenda, we welcome you to come forward. Seeing no one, we'll move on to background presentations and discussions. And the first is the National Night Out update. Major Riley, welcome.
Thank you. On behalf of the National Night Out Committee and the Williamsburg Police Department, in partnership with the City of Williamsburg, I would like to invite the community to join us for the city's 5th celebration of the National Night Out tomorrow, August 7th at the Williamsburg Community Building, 401 North Boundary Street, from 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Nationally, this is the 35th anniversary of the National Night Out as well. National Night Out is an annual community building campaign that promotes police community partnerships, neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer, more caring places to live. And it enhances the relationships between our neighborhoods and law enforcement to bring back a sense of community. Tomorrow's event will be held with the assistance of community partners. Music will be provided by WMBG Radio. Riverside Doctors Hospital will be on hand as well. CERT, 7-Eleven, WADA, Boy Scout Troop 103. Bubbles the Clown will be on hand for some fun activities. Also, Williamsburg's Parking and Recreation will be providing games at the event. There will be Color with a Cop. Chick-fil-A will be present as well, and Williamsburg Fire Department will also have their fire safety house on the scene. Additional snacks are being provided by Extraordinary Cupcakes and Baskin-Robbins, and we look forward to everybody coming to the event.
Questions for Major Riley?
No questions. Just thank you for not having a dunk tank this year. You didn't have one last year, but I enjoyed it when we did it 2 years ago. But just a comment, I think, in light of just the tension we have today and with, service that police officers provide in certain communities, this is a great opportunity for you all to show just how compassionate and caring you are for the community. And it's just really a wonderful day in my experience, and it's good to see that a lot of citizens do show up, and particularly the young children who show up and get to see you all as people and people that love doing what you do. So thank you for hosting this again.
And Mr. Maslin, I believe you're involved in the planning and organizing of this.
Yes, just want to add that we want to thank the Public Works Department for they'll be cooking the hot dogs and hamburgers.
Well, Major Riley, on behalf of all council and all the residents of Williamsburg, we appreciate everything that you and your colleagues do every day to serve, protect, and defend the people of this community, and that's all people. And the value of this event is the opportunity to get to know your local law enforcement officers and interact with them in a congenial, happy, non-threatening way and build that level of trust that we as a community need to depend upon. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
This takes us to Peninsula Agency on Aging update. Bill Massey, CEO. Welcome, sir. Please.
Mayor Freiling and members of the council, I'd like to assure you I'm not here to compete with the police and Bubbles the Clown today. So let me just get that piece straightened out. And thank you so much for the opportunity to come and take a few minutes to update you on the work of the Peninsula Agency on Aging in this community. Peninsula Agency on Aging has been serving seniors and family caregivers. We're in our 45th year, and I've had the privilege of serving as the chief executive for 34 of those years. And I've never had an opportunity to, I've never made an opportunity, maybe it is, to speak to City Council here in Williamsburg. So I'm assuming I was in a long period of preparation, and this is my chance to come and share information about our work with you today. So thank you for that. I'd like to recognize Dr. John Whitley, who is, as you know, your representative on the Peninsula Agency on Aging Board of Directors. And I assure you, Dr. Whitley is doing just a great job of keeping me straight there. So that's important work. Seriously, John, thank you for your service. And I'd also like to, I don't see him here today, but a dear friend, colleague, and an individual who's worked to serve in human services in Williamsburg for many, many years, Peter Wallentish. And Peter's been just a delight to work with over the years. He's always had just I think the right mindset of service to people of all ages. In his case, there, but he's helped guide me along the way too. So for that, I'm very appreciative. We also have an office located here in the Williamsburg area. I think technically it's in York County, but it's kind of hard for me to tell what's what sometimes. I'm sure you hear that a lot. But we do have an office over on Walden Mill Road at 312. So we are very much a part of the community. And I think for a number of years, Peninsula Agency on Aging was thought of as that organization out of Newport News that comes up here occasionally. If that ever were the truth, we're far past that now. We're here in a real serious way to serve seniors and family caregivers in the greater Williamsburg area. Numbers, I think, help. In the last fiscal year, we served some 183 residents of the city of Newport News. Newport News, you got me on the wrong, of Williamsburg. And thank you for smiling. And 183, and there are slightly over 2,000 people over the age of 60 in the city of Williamsburg. So that's a pretty significant percentage. I don't know, 8 or 9% of the older population were touched in one way or the other through services that we provided. I provided a folder, and on the left side is a flyer that lists the basic services that we provide. On the right side is our annual report and a couple of other brochures about the organization and services we provide. I'll just reference this one-page flyer from time to time over the next few minutes, if I may. Looking at the service list, starting with home delivered meals, or as it's better known, Meals on Wheels, we work collaboratively with the Williamsburg Area Meals on Wheels program. We've provided, I think, substantial funding support for many, many years to that organization, and work to refer eligible individuals to them for Meals on Wheels. And also we have provided some technical support to them over the years as far as menus and that type of thing is concerned. Adult Day Respite, we have been a partner with the United Methodist Church, the Williamsburg United Methodist Church, and has supported and utilized their Adult Day care program for a number of years too. Advanced care planning is something that I think we're hearing more about, or end-of-life issues. We became involved in a meaningful way about 4 years ago when 4 health systems that serve the Hampton Roads area and 4 area agencies on aging formed a partnership to hire staff and work to expand educational efforts in the communities across Hampton Road and roads including Williamsburg. And the systems are at Centera, Riverside, Bon Secours, and Chesapeake Regional Medical Center. And the 4 area agencies on aging, of course, Peninsula Agency on Aging, Bay Aging, which serves the Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck counties, and the Southampton Roads, Senior Services of Southeastern Virginia, as well as the Eastern Shore. We're part of that consortium. I think in addition to the importance of assisting people in advanced care planning, advanced directives, this type of information, that anytime you get 4 health systems who obviously are competitors to come together and actually jointly fund a project like this, that speaks volumes about the importance of the work. And I'd also mentioned earlier that Peninsula Agency on Aging for 10 plus years has worked with the Williams Mullen Law Firm, and twice annually we hold one-day sessions of attorneys from the law firm and students from the law school here at William & Mary come together and work with our staff to help. We can accommodate up to 32 individuals each of those days to complete their wills, powers of attorney, and advanced directives, and that's a significant contribution, and we've included that residents of Williamsburg in that particular program. Care coordination, the need for care coordination or trying to figure out really what your options are. Options counseling is another term that's used. Cuts across all socioeconomic groups. I frequently talk with people who are trying to live on $1,000 or $1,200 a month. I also talk with people who have millions of dollars in financial assets, and they don't have a clue many times where to turn to get the kind of support to help them deal with a spouse or parent who has Alzheimer's or who is is facing physical disabilities that really make life difficult. So we're there to serve across that spectrum, and I think sometimes we think of social type programs as only serving people who are in poverty, and while they certainly are a priority and we target our services there are others who really seek out assistance and support in dealing with their problems brought on by some of the things that happen as an individual ages. Going down the list, and I won't exhaust it one at a time, but caregiver support services. That there's so many people who carry an extremely heavy load of caregiving, and sometimes just a few hours of respite, a break from that will make all the difference in the world. And if local, state, federal government had to pay for all of the care that family caregivers provide, there would obviously be no way that this could be accomplished. We would be in dire straits. So we try to help them, give them a hand and assist so they could keep providing that care for their loved ones. Elder abuse, we of course work closely with adult services, adult protective services here in the city to help out in situations. So many times the abuse is either neglect, self-neglect, or financial exploitation. And those are really tough situations to deal with, so we need as many organizations as can be appropriately brought to the mix to deal with those types of situations. In-home personal care, frequently just a few hours a week of care can make a huge difference to help the caregiver, but also we find that even as little as 6 hours of care a week, if you can have a home health aide go into the home for 2 hours, 3 days a week, and space it, that you can and the bath seems to be the most important thing so that you don't have skin breakdown and get into all kinds of other issues. So something that's relatively inexpensive as having an aide in for 2 hours can just pay huge dividends also. Information and assistance I alluded to that earlier, but that's looking at the numbers for the city. We provided information and assistance to some 80 seniors here in the city of Williamsburg. So that and non-emergency medical transportation were the two highest utilized services. I think there were 39 individuals that used their non-emergency medical services. And this, you probably have heard of the RIDES program, which is a collaborative effort that Peninsula Agency on Aging, in conjunction with Faith in Action and WADA, are working to stand up a one-call system so that we can truly have one number that people can call to get directed to the proper transportation support. So we're very excited about that, and we're working in partnership. We think that collaboration is the way to get the job done. We look for opportunities to collaborate. I don't know if any of you remember Senator Hunter Andrews. If you're around, how can you forget, right? He was an outstanding individual. But he told me on a couple of occasions when we were having discussions, he said, "You don't think like the rest of them." And I think I took that as a compliment, I guess. But I think it was that we weren't looking we look to grow our agency, but not at the expense of someone else. And I think working together, we just accomplished so much more. And that's really what we're all about. And bottom line, I know you guys like bottom line. For every dollar that you contribute to the Peninsula Agency on Aging, you got back $4 in service, and we're going to really work to improve that. But I guess that's a 3-to-1 return. It's still not bad, is it? And but we want to do better. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here and share with you today.
Don't go anywhere yet. Questions or comments?
Well, Mr. Massey, thank you. I don't have any questions. Return on investment, it's hard to measure. I think what's really measurable is the service that you provide these seniors. And as a son with two aging parents, and I spend a lot of time in their home, trying to do as much care as I possibly can. Probably, if you ask them, I don't do enough. But it is a challenge, and I think it's one of those things that maybe the community doesn't see. And so I'm appreciative that your agency is here to help those folks that need it. So thank you.
And we really, really appreciate the support of City Council over the years, because you guys have been there every year for the 34 I've been, and I know before that too. So,
well, Mr. Massey, thank you for your presentation, for being here today and presenting to the community and to the City Council. And thank you to Dr. Whitley as well for your representation. As I remarked to you before Dr. Whitley had a chance to come in, you cannot have more of a fierce advocate than Dr. John Whitley himself, so I'm sure his representation is very well served, and also for your service as well. Congrats on 45 years of service, and I'm just generally very impressed about the holistic, care and services that's directed towards the elderly, and it's inclusive, especially particularly to our underprivileged ones. In terms of the other aspects of it, I understand a little bit about the advanced directive planning and the estate planning. I dabbled a little bit with it this summer at Coffin and Canals, but and I know it could be a very extensive and frustrating process if not done right. So that's encouraging to see that you have partnerships with the law school and also with Williams-Mullen to come down and provide that. And finally, to invoke Senator Hunter Andrews. That's wow. That he was a legendary senator, and all the more, if he's complimenting you, that means the agency is doing very, very well. So thank you for being here and appreciate your service.
Mayor Freeling, may I have literally one more minute?
Sure.
There's one thing I wanted to share that I hadn't. We as a community-based organization, and one of many, but over the last several years have realized that the social determinants of health are an important part of the mix of good health care and sustaining good clinical care when people come back home. And to that end, we, as an agency on aging, are very involved with our local healthcare providers. And we have a demonstration project actually going on over at the Williamsburg Centura Regional Medical Center at the present time to work to reduce the rate of readmissions for people who are really they're back in the hospital within a matter of days or weeks at the most in many, many cases. So, and that's an opportunity to do good for the individual, but also potentially to bring in additional resources so we can shore up some of these other programs like Meals on Wheels and so forth.
Can I ask one real quick question? Sorry. If folks wanted to learn more about the agency, do you guys have social media presence? You mentioned the address where they can
Yeah,
reach
you-
you, but phone number or anything like that?
Yeah, phone number, of course, it's 757, it's right there, my card is in the folder, but it's
just for the general public,
757 873-0541. We're on Facebook and Twitter and all the, I'm not good at it, but I have staff who are really good at it. And yeah, we can be easily found out there. And I appreciate the opportunity to share that information. Thank you.
And your website is www.paainc.org.
That's correct. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I would just like to echo what's already been said, but also to, just as a personal note, comment that my parents both had 24-hour care for the last few years of their lives. And one of the key, and my father had dementia to the point where he didn't know any of us over the last 5 years probably, but one of the most important things was having someone to help with information. I mean, all of the insurance documents that one receives and the medication, if you don't have help, just knowing what to take and when, it can be very challenging. And I was a caregiver just part-time on the weekends, and you do need relief after a situation like that. So thank you for the services that you offer.
Thanks for the presentation. I think we're fortunate in our community to have so many organizations that provide services to the public, especially seniors. I've lost track of where we are with Virginia 211 in terms of having a central point to go to get information about those organizations and services. Do you have any updates on that?
I do not. Unfortunately, 211 has not gained a lot of traction in our community as far as I know. And I know the concept is great, but practical application has been challenging. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Massey, did you say that for every $1 that the city expends, the residents here receive $4 in service value?
Yeah, the way I got there was, I believe it was $11,022 that the city contributed to our organization, and we returned just slightly under $44,000 in services. So.
Yeah, that's really impressive. But beyond just that financial benefit, how does one really place a value on the enhanced quality of life that is received by the residents of this community? Like Ms. Ramsey, I had situations dealing with my parents, with my wife's parents. As somebody who's approaching the senior category, I'm waiting for somebody to have.
I'm already there.
I know, someone's going to have issues with me. So
We already do.
But what you really do though is you help leverage that municipal investment with organizational efficiencies and economies of scale, and through your professional skills, provide services that we could never imagine doing on our own. And the value of that one-stop shopping clearinghouse for people who are in need is really immense. So on behalf of all the residents of this city, we thank you for everything you do, not only in Williamsburg, but throughout the peninsula, because, in many ways, we are all one community.
The Williamsburg Health Foundation and the Williamsburg Community Foundation have been extremely generous to our organization in support of the work in this community too.
And I'd just like to mention, if Mr. Wallentish is not here, that is our fault for making him wear too many hats. So I hope you understand.
I would never say he told me that, right?
Any other questions? No. Thank you, sir.
So much.
This takes us to our third background presentation today, which is the Tourism Development Fund Implementation Update. Ms. DeWitt?
I think we're going to tag team it, Mayor.
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah. And I think I'm going to start us off, but I don't have the clicker, Michelle, so.
Okay.
So the purpose of today's presentation is to kind of bring the council up to date with where we are with implementing the Tourism Development Fund. And we're going to start with just a timeline of events to remind you of how we got to here. If you remember, this timeline used to actually span 2 pages of the PowerPoint. I have condensed it down now to 1. It starts with September of 2016 when at the GIO retreat, where we started talking about tourism projects and were unable to identify funding that would enable those projects to proceed in a timely manner. In August of 2017, we adopted the policy document that created the Tourism Development Fund, along with the tax increases associated with funding it. And then in January of 2018, Senate Bill 942 kind of changed that funding landscape by instituting a regional taxation scheme that would return money to the city that would enable us to fund the Tourism Development Fund that way. And then in May, as a subsequent action, we repealed our tax acts that would funded the Tourism Development Fund as it was originally conceived so that we could proceed with its implementation now in August. So we want to start with just a little bit of bringing you up to speed on what we have done, and we're going to begin with a review of Resolution 17-12, which is the established policy document. And we're just going to talk about the various components of it. Then we're going to talk about the review structure of the committee, and then talk a little bit about the funding commitments.
Before you go on, just in case there's any confusion or ambiguity with anybody in the audience, could you just say a few words about the distinction or differences between the Tourism Development Fund, what it's designed to do, and the Tourism Council, what it's designed to do? Because they're both drawing funding from the same source. So I think there's potential for people to conflate the two, but they're really different, even though they both attempt to deal with growing tourism base.
Absolutely. They're both very different, and at their core, the major difference is that the Tourism Council that we spent a lot of time focusing on lately has to do with marketing the region and not really product development, whereas the Tourism Development Fund here locally in Williamsburg is designed to do product development. And so at its core, those are the big differences.
And we're about to show you how the money flows.
Yeah, may provide even more insight. So just so that we can keep it straight, this is how the money operates from tourism locally and regionally. So right now we're showing you the regional model. Senate Bill 942 established or reestablished a $2 tax on every lodging night in the market, and also created a new 1% sales tax that was implemented July the 1st. Half of the funding from each of those two sources actually flows to the Tourism Council and provides its funding stream. And then locally, it's a bit more complicated, and we're going to look at it more closely so that we can explain it better. But essentially, the major change locally was that as with the FY19 budget, we actually created the Tourism Fund. And it is a repository for all things tourism to be funded out of. And what that does is it helps us keep track of what we're spending collectively on tourism. It also provides us a repository for the local funding derived from Senate Bill 942's regional scheme. So half of the $2 tax and half of the 1% sales tax actually come back to Williamsburg to be spent locally. I forgot to blink. I guess that was our signal. So this is looking at it more closely, the local piece of this. So from the 1% sales tax, we expect to receive $1.9 million. From the $2 sales tax, about $560,000. And then the general fund, and this is confusing to a lot of folks, the general fund is actually doing a transfer to the Tourism Fund of $2.2 million. Now that is not new funding for the Tourism Fund. That is the existing tourism funding in the General Fund that's being transferred to this one-stop shop for all things tourism. And if you look now on the expenditure side out of the Tourism Fund, that first box is the maintenance of effort, which is a term that I don't particularly like, that's being applied both in the budget and in Senate Bill 942. And that's the flow out of that $2.2 million. So it comes into the Tourism Fund, and then it's expended out to all those things that were already promised funding in the General Fund. Additionally, we have the admin cost of about $105,000 down there at the bottom, and then the rest of that money flows over to tourism development. And this is where we spent a lot of time during the budget session developing how this was going to work in this coming year, or actually in this fiscal year. The first expense is tourism contingency. This is an amount of money that the City Council has historically had in the budget that, as the budget was presented to Council, was unfunded. And then we added money to it out of this funding source. Currently in the budget, it's posted at $50,000 for the year. We also decided to provide committed funding in this budget year to Occasion for the Arts and Culture Fix, totaling $100,000, and that's that box. And then we also said that we wanted to do downtown vibrancy implementation following an EDA recommended schedule, and we committed $150,000 to that process. And then the leftover funding is all sent over to what we're going to spend the most of our time talking about today, the tourism development grant process. And that is expected to total about $2.1 million. Now I say expected because most of this funding has never been realized by the city before, so it's unpredictable. This is our best estimate of what we can expect from these funding sources as we move through the fiscal year. So, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the policy, and the purpose of this review is just to remind you of how it exists today, and then also kind of give you a forecast of some things that the staff are going to bring back to you for recommended changes to the policy. Some are required because from the point of time where we did the adoption of this policy document and today, Senate Bill 942 kind of changed the landscape, particularly as it relates to marketing the destination, which was a major theme of the policy document when it was adopted. So just looking here in section 1 at the fiscal policy, and these are the sections taken right out of the existing policy. If you look at number 3, this is an example of something that we're going to have to come back to you with a recommendation for change. And that is establishing that we're going to do a 5-year financial plan for the Tourism Development Fund. And while the intent there, in my opinion, when this was created, was to establish a vehicle where the City Council could fund projects that were going to require funding that was greater than what we might have available in any one single year to give to that particular project, I think the way that it reads right now is too similar to financial planning for a capital improvement plan, which this fund was not intended to be. So this is one of those things where we'll wordsmith it and come back with a recommendation for change. If you look at the next one, the purpose, normally I don't like to read from a PowerPoint, but I will read this one because of its importance. The purpose of the Tourism Development Fund is to increase patronage to restaurants, attractions, hotels, and events in the city of Williamsburg through financial assistance and reinvestment in tourism products, placemaking projects, special events, public-private partnerships, and destination marketing. As we have been talking about this at the staff level, our executive team meetings, which consist of the department heads, we've talked about this last phrase at the end, destination marketing. And that's another example of something that was critically important when the policy was adopted, but now that we have the Tourism Council and a significant amount of funding going to that purpose, do we really need destination marketing as an eligible expense from our local tourism fund? One of the conversations that we've had is that if someone were to propose a new special event, would they not be able to apply for marketing funding for that event? And I think the answer might be yes, but it's clearly not destination marketing. So just moving ahead, if you look at section 2,
just go back and say, you said the way you posed it was they would not be able to apply, and the answer is yes. What you mean by that is yes, they would be able to apply.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure you weren't.
My feeling is the intention of council at the time this was adopted was to fund that kind of marketing. So if you look now at section 2, expenditures with housekeeping revision, there's some things here. The housekeeping revision is again number 3. You can see a reference there to the Williamsburg Area Destination Marketing Committee, which Ms. Shelton will tell us no longer exists. And so obviously that's a change that needs to be made in the policy document. Down at number 5 is the allowance for the administrative cost of up to 10%. As I showed you on the financial slide, we're about 4%, a little greater than 4%. So we're well under that threshold. Section 2 projects is an area where the staff will likely come back with some recommended changes. And we're going to talk about how we're going to arrive at those recommendations in a few minutes. Section 3, application and process, is another one. And really the reason that we're doing this here today, if you'll note that line number 1 says submission of phase 1 applications in August. That was a reference to this month. And obviously we're not prepared to do that. So we want to make sure that we take the time to get the decision process correct. And so we're going to show you in a few minutes a new recommended schedule for the application timeline. And then finally, we have the review committee. And this is something that the City Council spent an enormous amount of time on as we worked through the TDF process on who should be doing the review and the recommendation to the City Council. One of the things that we have talked about at the staff level is the fact that this application process is an application of and to the City Council. and that the review committee really only has the responsibility of reviewing applications that are submitted and providing a recommendation that then can advise the city council. So along those lines, what we want to recommend to you is that we not take any steps toward appointing members to this committee until we come back with the full recommendations, including criteria and an application for the council's approval. That way it's very clear that this committee is not establishing criteria or deciding what projects to fund, but merely using the criteria that you've established to determine which projects they recommend should receive funding.
So in that way, is it somewhat similar to the Architectural Review Board, where they're looking at cases and then they're applying the guidelines that have already been stated as policy, and then with the ARB they're making a decision in most cases, but here it would be a recommendation, or maybe it's like
Similar to the Arts Commission.
Okay.
I think that the major difference is that they will not have the final authority to award funds. So then the next one is just a very simple diagram that we have that we created and actually posted to the city's website to explain the makeup of the committee as it stands in the existing policy document. So it's 5 members. 3 of those members are tourism representatives, and that's an undefined criteria for membership. And then 2 community at large representatives. They have 2-year terms with a 3-term limit, allowing for 6 years of service possible. And now, Michelle's going to take over and tell you about the next steps.
Great. So the next steps, as Drew laid the background for us, many things happened in the past year and a half, one of which was Senate Bill 942, affecting how the city was looking at its tourism development fund. So today, staff's recommending what we do for the next 6 months to get ready for the grant process for the tourism grant program. That's that local piece of half of the new money that's coming to the region. So the next steps we need to do are to talk about award criteria, to create an application, and then ultimately before that, council make committee appointments to create this review advisory committee who will make recommendations to city council. And I'm going to go through our thought process there and the timeline we're suggesting. So we're suggesting 2 public meetings to solicit input, not on whether there should be a tourism development fund. We've done that, had quite a bit of input and discussion around that, but now we need to talk about, we have these funds, how should we invest them in our community? How does the public feel about that? What do they want to see those projects look like? What are the criteria they want to see? And we're suggesting that we do this in the form of a design charrette, so we can actually show people images of different projects. We can show them, it might be newspaper headlines that say, one may say the city builds XYZ, the other may say the city invests in XYZ with a private funder, and see how the public feels about the different roles of the city. So again, not defining exact projects, but defining what types and criteria the public would like to see based on the values of our community. We also, thanks to IT, can use a survey tool to gather a large pool of input as we do that. So 2 public meetings, a survey tool, and then wanted to talk a little bit about number 2 here, about how the criteria would be structured. It would be similar to a request for proposals or an RFP matrix that we commonly use in government, where you'd have ranges of scores under different criteria. So the committee could actually quantify through scoring under different matrix categories to arrive at their recommendation to send to City Council. So we want to hear the values and the input and the vision of the community and the public, and then staff will work into turning that into criteria in a scoring matrix that your advisory committee could use to do that. So we showed a picture here. One of the things that may come out is that a live entertainment venue is very important for the tourism success of this region. So keep that in mind as we move to the next slide. So once we have those public meetings and talk with the public, then we'll need to design an application based on the criteria that came out. So you can see here you'd define criteria, then you'd plug that into an actual application that someone would answer, how they're meeting those criteria, and you could then come up with a project that's an amphitheater, providing that live entertainment scenario that the public had envisioned in the beginning. So we're recommending that that's how we get input on the criteria and design the application. We're also recommending that we alter the timeline away from, right now it's bundled with the budget process. And I'll show you the slide you've seen before, which shows the way it was presented last year, how these applications would be received and how council would make a decision. This talked about, as Drew mentioned, an August Phase 1 application being due, and then working through a process where staff would review Phase 1. Those that were eligible would be invited to come back for Phase 2, and that would be reviewed by the Tourism Development Fund Committee and the City Manager and the Planning Commission. And then it would be inputted into the City Manager's draft budget that's released in the early spring. And it would coincide with the budget process with a council decision when you adopt the budget in May, and then notification to the applicants and awarding of the funds after the contracts are written in June. So staff had long discussions about this and felt that uncoupling the processes was the best way to go, because we could very easily see a scenario where one or the other of these, either the budget or the Tourism Development Fund, would become overshadowed by the other. And the budget is extremely important in how council implements its vision, and deserves that concentration of the public and of this body as you move through the process. So we suggest actually streamlining the process, making it a little bit shorter, because this is a year-long process, and uncoupling it from the budget according to this scenario. So it would be March through October, and the first phase would be, again, that Phase 1, an initial application that was a description of the project, a discussion with staff, and then an invitation, whether that meets the criteria or not, whether to come in for Phase 2. So Phase 1 would be in March, and then if they were selected to be invited to Phase 2, they would have 6 to 8 weeks until May to submit a final application that would have a business plan, would have sketches, it might have engineering, other things that would make a more thorough application to the process. And then in June, your advisory committee who's making recommendations on the grants would actually review the grants, visit locations if that was appropriate, and involve the EDA and the Planning Commission in that review as well. So that would get us through the summer, reviewing the applications, making a recommendation, checking in with the EDA and Planning Commission, and lead us to a September public hearing in front of the City Council. That would be a recommendation from your advisory council that included input from the EDA and the Planning Commission, a public hearing, and then council approval in September. So the process is March through September, with October the money hitting the street after contracts are written with the awardees.
There will be a City Council public hearing, but is there a Planning Commission public hearing, or is it just Planning Commission discussion and review?
I think that would be, it would be Planning Commission discussion and review, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't take public comment.
Exactly. So that's the new streamlined timeline that we're talking about. Again, March through October cycle that uncouples it from the budget and in a little shorter time frame. You don't have to wait 12 months for a decision, but still gives staff and the public bodies time to review and get input on those. So taking all of that into consideration, we have a next steps timeline for you. So here we are on the doorstep of fall 2018. We're proposing 2 public input meetings where we'll talk about those criteria and values that the community has around investing in tourism. Also have an online survey tool that people can use who cannot make it to a meeting. And then we would come back to City Council in the winter with a full package of how the Tourism Development Fund will work, from amendments to your policy, to what your advisory committee should look like, and what the application and the criteria would look like as well. After that, we would begin promoting it, and then accept applications in March and go through that wheel of March through October that I discussed in the prior slide. So in October of 2019, the money would have been collected by the Finance Department, and so we'll know an exact dollar, and the awards can be made in October 2019. Happy to answer any questions.
So there's a lot in that. I think one of the things that jumps out at me is the committee. And I'm just trying to reconcile whether we're not utilizing the knowledge of tourism professionals that would make up the committee when it comes time to decide what the criteria will be. Because we're leaving that to staff under this scenario to figure that out. And we're leaving the charrettes to be developed by staff. And so we're missing the benefit of tourism professionals to play a role in what images get shown, what direction tourism funds could be spent. And so I'm not sure that I'm fully on board with holding off on not assembling that body sooner. So that was just one of the thoughts, and so I'm grappling with that, and I look forward to hearing comments from the other council members. Then also, how does this process that you've demonstrated here line up with best practice compared to seen in other communities when you looked at tourism development funds?
Sure. So there's many communities. Some of them have very small funds. Some of them have larger funds. We looked at two of our competitors that have similar size funds, Asheville and Virginia Beach. So we've been talking about those over the last year and a half or so. And they do them differently. Asheville is a regional fund where they have a committee they take applications just like this and then make awards based on criteria. Virginia Beach's fund is set up more as a CIP, where it's internally determined by staff with a public hearing through Planning Commission, but very staff and council directed and opportunity directed when to spend those funds and to actually program them out through a 5-year capital improvement plan.
Well, and so in these comments now, but my concern is that it's lack of a better term, very bureaucratic in all of those stages. And fear is that we're getting away from, in that bureaucracy, we're getting away from the entrepreneurs or the people in the business sector who make these decisions and know what's driving visitation at any given time. And so I'll leave with that for now.
Well, let me preface by saying thank you, Michelle and Drew, for your hard work. I think, as it's been mentioned already, over the past year and a half, there's been a lot of wait and see, and it's good to see the next steps forward towards implementing this particular policy, and particularly with reinvesting in tourism product. And I think when it was passed, there was this sense of urgency that we do need to reinvigorate our tourism product. So that's to be commended. I just did have a few questions. First, I guess from the beginning, I saw that the 10% that the city is going to keep, from what I understand from before, part of that 10% is going to hire a TDF administrator, correct? Now, where are we in that process? Is that being ongoing, or are we waiting to have these two public hearings and then?
No, that is ongoing. So as Drew mentioned, that percentage is about 4% that the city is using and is programmed and budgeted in council's adopted budget for a tourism development specialist who will fall in my office, and they will run the tourism development fund grant application.
And that's part of staff's review from your org chart that you presented, right? That TDF administrator is really guiding that through.
Exactly.
From your office. Okay. That's good. And do we have any idea when this person might be particularly hired by? Or?
We have advertised. If anyone is interested, we're accepting applications until the position is filled. But we have received many applications and are working those through the HR department.
Right, and I think as Vice Mayor Pons has mentioned before, having the Tourism Development Fund administrator, based on the job description, this person will be a tourism industry expert, and it'll be good to have that person kind of lead on with the council's tourism development policy. In terms of the public hearings, it's really welcoming to hear that we're engaging the public now. I wish we did that before, but can't really go back to the past with this. So moving forward, in terms of, do you have kind of a vision of how you're going to lead that discussion? I know you mentioned about gathering public input for developing a criteria. But in this particular charrette, I see it as kind of very unique because it's so nebulous at this point. There's a lot that remains to be seen and defined with this policy. So I'm just curious, are you going to present kind of an example RFP matrix, hand that out, and kind of ask folks to identify certain aspects that they would like to see be included in the evaluation process? Or is this just kind of, at this point, what would you like to see, kind of like a wish list of sorts?
Right. So we've planned to do it as giving images and ideas and values about tourism projects to the public and actually having them vote.
The possibilities.
And vote on, given limited resources in the particulars of our community, which would you pick and which would you like to see these tax dollars invested in? So in that sense, it's a reaction to in a voting of those things. I think it's entirely part of the process to accept input from the public about specific criteria if they're at that place. Some people may be at a place where they know what they think those criteria are. We think most people probably aren't. They're more in line with what are our values, what do we want to see in our city to attract visitors and be successful in the future.
So let's say, for one example, obviously the charrettes haven't happened, so this is all hypothetical, but I'm thinking of projects that are currently in the city's CIP or GIO's documents, like the Fort Kiwanis Field Park. I guess the scope of my question is, there are certain city projects that will be included, presumably, in the city general fund, and then or the CIP fund rather, and then there are others that will be included in tourism fund. How are you going to be able to kind of distinguish those kind of projects when you guide residents on that discussion?
Right. So that's still a work in progress, but we've talked about that because certainly these aren't funds to substitute general fund. I think Drew has some thoughts about it as well.
I mean, the way that we're currently thinking about the design charrette theme of these meetings is you would see this image on the screen, whether it's a headline, a pretend headline from the newspaper, or a statement about overnight stays. It might be a picture of an amphitheater, as Michelle said, and then you'll rank that 1 to 5, meaning how excited you are about that being funded out of the TDF or that being the model of the TDF. The reason we want to structure it that way is because we're trying to be very careful to measure expectations of the public. We don't want the public to come to a meeting like that thinking that they're going to sit down with a piece of paper and write down all the projects they'd like to see funded out of the TDF, and then over a 5-year period, all of those projects are going to come to fruition. Because frankly, we have no control over that. It's based on who applies. Right. So what we're going to try to use these meetings to do is to tease out of the public what they think the key elements are to measure the success of the program by. And so we're lucky that we have some guides. Asheville's criteria is publicly available, so we're able to look at what they've done. Now, their guidance only goes so far because their program is designed and centered around overnight stays. And so that's really the most critical component of whether or not their project gets funded, is how many overnight stays it'll generate and how long those stays might be. So we're going to have to be a little bit more creative. If we look just in the state of Virginia, Loudoun County uses a program similar to what we're putting into place right now. Their program is very, very new, and they don't have hardened criteria. They've actually said to us that they're going to be interested in seeing how our process turns out because they may consider adopting something similar. So this is going to be an interesting process. We're going to learn a lot going along the way and then come back to you and make those recommendations. To Mr. Pons's point, though, the purpose of bringing this to you now is so that the council has the opportunity to refresh your mindset on the TDF. A tremendous amount has happened since you adopted this policy. And it may be that the city council now needs to think more strategically about where this money goes and how you spend it. And it may be changing this entire plan in terms of how you envisioned the TDF originally.
And for that, we appreciate that, especially giving the public an update on where this all very new concept is coming to mind. So definitely very much appreciated. Just 2 more questions.
Sure.
For the review committee. So this review committee is different from the tourism council, as mentioned before. But given that we are a small town, I wouldn't be surprised if some folks that comprise of the tourism council will want to or are eligible for this review committee. So has staff contemplated, are they allowed to kind of do these dual roles, or is that encouraged?
Yeah, Councilman Zhang, we really haven't gotten to that level.
Okay.
We looked at the criteria that City Council had put out about the 5 members and understood why that was done, but hadn't gotten to the level of who's appointed, who's allowed to.
And as the policy reads right now, I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
They lived in the city and you wanted to appoint them as a tourism rep to satisfy one of those 5 seats, I think that would be the prerogative of the council.
So that means it's possible that somebody could be on both, but there's no restriction that prevents that, and there's no guarantee that that will happen.
Unless there's
Right.
a recommendation from staff, right? In terms of the cycle, the proposed application cycle, and this is connected to the review committee, I'm seeing that it has to go through the EDA first, right? Current application cycle. So it goes through, there's an EDA application.
That was the prior.
Oh, that was the prior, okay.
So the new one, let me get to it here.
Okay,
There's the
perfect.
new one. The new one has the EDA and the Planning Commission giving input after the review
After
committee.
review. Okay, great. In terms of, so EDA and Planning Commission, what does staff envision with their roles with this? I think Councilman Pons alluded to this point earlier. It just seems that there is a lot of commissions or committees that an application has to go through. That's just kind of my understanding.
Sure.
So can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure. So the Planning Commission review is actually explicitly mentioned in your policy, in council's policy about this, that they would look at the projects in terms of land use in the comp plan aspects of the projects and weigh in on that. The EDA had been involved from a business sustainability aspect. They're involved in business vibrancy and also recruiting businesses who add to that tourism flavor. So that was the concept there. And I hear you loud and clear about the timing there. We had the EDA and the Planning Commission doing that in the same month this time instead of spreading it out. But it does.
So the review committee, its scope is a lot more narrower in terms of grading a particular project. And then it goes to the EDA for review again in terms of its economic impact. It just seems like there's a redundancy there.
Right, and that's how it's set up now, is that the scoring criteria will be used by the committee, and then it would go to EDA and Planning Commission
And
for
I'm all
just a check.
I'm all for an appropriate amount of scrutiny because these are public funds, but there's also a point where it might just be redundant.
Sure. And exactly, and I think that's exactly why we're here today, and this can all be changed. So we're aiming to have those changes ready for you by the winter, but need to hear that discussion.
Has staff thought of potentially one of the two, or I think more appropriately be the EDA, kind of taking on the role of this review committee because it's comprised of business leaders and industry leaders? Has staff had that discussion at all?
Yeah, we did. We actually talked about that fairly extensively.
I think City Council had this conversation.
Yes.
At one point,
We decided we weren't going to do that.
This is one of those things that was batted around numerous times. And at the staff level, the same conversation about should the tourism review committee be the EDA? Should it be a subcommittee of the EDA, or should it be its own thing? In the end, we did not come back with a recommendation because we felt like that's something really that the council spent a lot of time on when you developed the policy initially. And what we'd like for you to do is think about that as we move toward the final recommendations, and then we can make those changes as you all see fit.
One final question. In terms of the cycle, kind of going out of the budget, what's staff's contemplation with October, giving out the funds? Is there a particular reason why?
The reason is that we'll know our final amount of money collected from the Tourism Development Fund about 90 days after the tax is paid. Do I have that right, Barbara? So the last tax will be paid June 30th.
Gotcha.
So we'd have the August, September, October. But also, we were trying to fit it in when it made sense for staff and to have time to get through the process. So both those things were a factor.
Thank you.
If I can just jump back in, one of the things that I fear can potentially get lost is the reason that we went down this road. And that was, looking at our financial future, how is the city going to drive revenue in ways that it hasn't been able to do with the existing infrastructure. And so I think council all agreed that we needed new tourism product that drove visitation and spending in the city, whether it's somebody coming from Newport News to spend. What can happen if we lose focus of that, and wish list becomes something that's a nicety, but it doesn't really drive revenues, then we lose our focus. And so my concern is that we have to make sure that when we talk about this and as we move forward, the purpose of this is to drive revenue.
I think that that's included in the purpose, speaking of the purpose. But I think we also have to remember, to Michelle and Drew's point, that this is not only a new program and a new process, but a changed program and process from what we originally had last year. And so we're sort of caught in the middle right now as we try to utilize what we had that was really good and then sort of massage it to adjust to the funding stream that'll be coming from SB 942. And I would guess we don't know all the answers to that now, which is why we're having the conversation. And I think that I haven't been to a design charrette yet, but I do remember that that's the term for the Monticello streetscape conversation. And from what I read, it was very well received from the public, and there was probably a lot more input and discussion from that type of process than from others. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that all works, and I'm a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of person. So I'm glad for that, and also for the communication. I think that we've had this sort of struggle all along, is how's the best way to explain what the intent is, what our final goals are to the public. And I think that, just to your point, I'd written down one thing about having the process after the budget is that we'll know how much money we actually have to go into it. And I think that since we now have the Tourism Council, which is very clearly defined, then that leaves some latitude with our review committee to take tourism and community at large professionals and maybe broaden that a little bit, because I've often said I think we have a wealth of information and people in this community who could provide valuable input. So just a couple things that I think that we do need to, allow some massaging of the process until we get where we want to be. And I agree with Doug, though, that we definitely want to see specific projects, and I hope that the review in phase 2 will make sure that the requirements are being met. So thank you.
So one scenario might be to focus on one large project. Talk to the college, talk to the counties, and see how much buy-in we can get from them, and then have that philosophy discussion with the public to say, is this something you would support? Rather than have all these different projects, taking away money that really, we've got one shot to have a nice, large regional project. How would you be able to get that type of input in the public workshops?
I think that one way to do that would be through, just brainstorming it here, would be the fake headline or the proposed headline. I think the way that you do that is you have one that reads one way, and then you have another one that reads exactly the opposite, and everybody scores it 1 to 5, and hopefully that teases out whether or not that audience felt like it was more important to do one large project with all of the money, or more important to have a fund that would fund those types of projects, and then some money that would go toward more immediate spending. So that's the intent, and I think it's going to be an interesting and challenging and hopefully fun exercise for the department head team to try and structure this presentation to get that kind of input.
So to do that type of analysis in the public forum, would you then be giving each person a finite number of points, so that they're not scoring 10 points for everything they see because they like everything? That somehow they have to allocate so there is priorities established.
I think that at least our original conversation was to use, the city has a scoring system, and so it's just 1 to 5, so there's no limit. If I would like to think that a public attending that meeting would have a hard time ranking two statements that were exactly the opposite, all fives. But I guess it is possible. So that's something that we could give some thought to.
Because you can have a lot of projects up there that everybody likes.
Yeah.
So how do you set the priorities?
Right.
Something I think is really important to keep in mind. Well, first of all, there's a lot to like about this presentation. I especially appreciate the condensed timeline that projects would go through. But I think something that's important to keep in mind is we don't have any money yet. The tax just started to be collected at the beginning of last month, and we could reasonably expect to receive money sometime between September, October, and December. And then we've still got the issue of dividing this revenue stream through two different pipelines to get to the Tourism Council and to get to us, and there might be some kinks along the way.
And the CFOs from the city and the two counties are working together along with the Chamber and Tourism Alliance staff to determine exactly how that process is going to work, and that's the unknown, is how that affects our funding stream.
So the importance of that is just people kept asking, why are you in such a hurry to do this? Well, it's not so much that we're in such a hurry to do it, it's the process is going to take a long time to bear out, and we have to start it at some point if we're really going to invest in this community. Going back to Councilman Zhang's question, the way I'm viewing it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just using this example to make sure I understand or don't understand what you've presented. The review committee will look at the applications and score them based upon objective criteria and how that application fits or meets those criteria that are stated. And they'll evaluate the business plan and they'll look at whether the project seems reasonable. They will then make recommendations along, I assume, with some comments on each of these projects. That set of recommendations could independently go to the EDA and to the Planning Commission at the same time. Planning Commission is looking at them from a land use standpoint to make sure that whatever is being proposed is not totally out of line with zoning, and if it is, what's going to have to happen to make something like that even practical, much less possible. And the EDA is looking at it from the standpoint of how does it contribute to the overall business health and downtown vibrancy and the things, but neither of them is in the approval business.
Correct.
They're just adding comments to the committee's comments that all then would come to council so that we're getting input from all three groups as we make our decision, as opposed to sometimes what happens, something comes to us and they say, you know, we haven't heard from the EDA on this. Maybe we should run it back through them to get their input. So that's all happening as part of the regular process and guiding our decision making or
Correct.
informing our decision
Correct.
making. The one thing where I get lost in all of this, and I think it's the same point that Mr. Pons may have had an issue with and Mr. Zhang to some degree, is slides 14 and 15. And it's the charrette. And is the public going to, through this process of input and scoring, going to be developing the criteria that the committee uses to evaluate these projects? Or are they going to be creating a wish list of things that they would like to see in the community? Because the one example you have on slide 14 is a 5,000-seat amphitheater. That's not a criteria that you would meet in an application. That's an item that would go on, hey, I wish we had one of those. I mean, they're two very different things. So which of those two is the charrette teasing out from the public?
So I think that, you know, if we're showing this slide and it says 5,000-seat amphitheater and people are scoring it, what that tells us is this is a type of project that they think is either a high priority for the fund or a low priority for the fund. And then we are able to design criteria that would rank and score projects based on that. So to take it as one single slide, obviously I see your point, it's one project. But combined with a slide that shows a sidewalk, a slide that shows a baseball field or a softball field, and maybe, you know, an aquatic center, a field house, all of those various slides combined and the scores that are provided would then help the staff develop criteria that would give you some insight as to whether or not the application fits within the guidelines or not.
And the part where I get disconnected is using a performance venue as an example. We have a lot of people in this community who would love to see an indoor performance venue. The Kimball is one example, but for years we had a group that wanted a full performing arts center in Williamsburg. Individuals in the community wanting that doesn't determine whether or not it's going to happen. What determines whether it's going to happen is whether somebody's going to come and invest the money because they've done the market analysis and they've determined there's enough demand and it's sustainable and it will be a positive cash flow business venture, and they're willing to step up and do it. So that's where I get lost in the what we're really trying to achieve from the charrette. Are we just looking for the types of things the community would like?
Well, I think what we're really looking at, and I'll give you an example, maybe that would help. An example would be, and Michelle used it in her headline example, the city invests $2 million in X project, right, as a headline. And then the next headline that you would score in the same way is the city partners with developer to match funding for X project. And so the scoring of that would tell us how important to the community leveraging funds is. So the way that that would then be translated by the staff into a criteria is match amount in an application. So obviously then as the review committee meets and they are scoring the application, an application that has a higher match amount would score higher than an application that has a lower match amount. That's how this would play out in a practical sense.
Yeah.
But that would be a criteria establishment as opposed to a project.
Exactly. What we're trying to do, and obviously we missed the mark, and it's my fault because I did this slide, is that we were trying to get away from the concept of we're developing a project list.
Yeah.
We wanted to get away from that. And so, but at the same time, we need criteria so that we can inform the process to know which projects are applicable. Right? The ones that are desired, the ones that the community thinks are going to be important.
I mean, I think the public input is valuable. I think we need to maybe have a little more conversation on what it is that we put before them to get their input, because eventually the criteria will be decided by council after staff makes a recommendation.
Yes.
After collecting all this public input.
Exactly.
But we're not going to be talking about in these criteria, do we or don't we want an outdoor 5,000 seat performance venue?
No.
That's not.
That is not going to be a criteria.
It does, but for me, it's all about the results. And if we have criteria that solicits input that helps select projects that drive results, then that's the difference. If we're just establishing criteria based on the citizens' wants, well, then it could be any number of things. And it seemed to me that those would be more city-driven projects. And for me, I think what's going to drive those results are the bigger projects that are going to have a private-public partnership, or municipalities joining together to create a bigger project. And I think yes, so that's the difference.
If we work out those details, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
What do you need from us?
Right. I think all we really needed was, the purpose of this was to inform you that obviously we're not accepting applications in August, and to tell you why we're not accepting applications in August, and to put before you a plan that we felt like we needed your approval before we kicked off. And that was 2 public meetings to try and gather this input. Obviously, we've struggled with it here today. We've struggled with it at the staff level of how to design those meetings to get the input that we need without giving the sense to a group of attendees at a meeting that they've just created the wish list of what's going to be funded in the next year. And so if we can get a head nod to move in that direction, then the staff can continue their discussion on what that meeting is going to look like and come back and inform you on what we arrive at.
I also heard there's some flexibility around the process itself, and it could be a shorter time frame, but there's some flexibility there and discussion that needs to happen.
I'd like you also think about the committee and make put some thought into when we should try to establish that sooner versus later, because again, I think that there's some merit in having those experts bring that professional input to this whole process,
sure,
to the criteria.
And if we wanted to tweak the makeup of the committee a little bit, is that possible, or does that have to have a change? Could that be part of a staff recommendation as well?
Sure.
It is, yes, and I think it's a policy document that I think your attorneys say could definitely be amended.
So what we're going to have to do is when we come back to you sometime in the winter, we will be putting before you a revised policy document. So the hope is that between now and then, we can have those internal conversations about what you need from your review committee, because obviously what you need has changed from what you needed then, and restructure it in a way that makes sense. And so, as I said, we went through several machinations of that at the staff level. If we ended up saying that we don't necessarily need a new committee to do this, but that this could be a function of a subcommittee of the EDA or the EDA itself, then obviously we revise that will to include only that step. And those are the decisions that we need to make between now and the winter when we come back with the comprehensive revisions to the policy.
Okay. I guess we're comfortable with moving forward and seeing what you come back with.
Excellent.
City Council communications, anything that anybody would like to report from any liaison assignment?
Yeah, as you all know, I serve on the Tourism Task Force. We met last week where, and again, the task force is 2 elected officials from each of the 3 municipalities, the chief operating officers, the Chamber Alliance. And what we did is essentially approve a draft set of bylaws, a draft set of a memorandum of understanding between the current Alliance and staff and the new Tourism Council, and then also a job description for the Executive Director. On August 21st, I believe it is, the Tourism Council will meet with the Tourism Task Force, where the handoff will essentially happen and the Tourism Council will move forward. They can accept these 3 documents, they can tweak them, they can rewrite them, but the purpose is to kind of give them a head start so that when they finally do assemble, they can move more expeditiously to serving the function that they have.
Thank you.
The only thing I was going to mention was, as part of the EDA has been looking at downtown vibrancy and the study that came back from the consultants, and has had 2 out of 3 facilitated meetings to try and come up with a plan to utilize the $150,000 that was budgeted towards that. So that'll be further communicated out as additional information is gleaned.
Do you have any idea when they might come to some kind of conclusion on that?
It could be, I think, as early as September.
Okay.
Come to council.
Great. Thank you. Schedule of meetings, Mr. Trivett, anything you want to highlight?
Just obviously the National Night Out, which we've already talked about, and then the police department's, Williamsburg Police Department's reaccreditation process is about to kick off, and they're going to have a public meeting on Tuesday, August the 14th in the afternoon, where the public can come and talk about accreditation issues.
Where is it?
Stryker Center.
It's going to be at Stryker Center.
That was a dramatic pause. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Major Barker.
exactly.
And the Summer Youth Achievement Program graduation
It's Friday.
I believe it's Friday. Is that right, Mr. Valentich?
at noon?
Yes, Mayor. It's Friday at the community building. For the youth.
Great, thank you, sir. I'm sorry. Okay. This takes us to open forum. Anybody who'd like to address council on any matter, please come forward. If you could kindly offer your name and address and keep your remarks to 5 minutes or less, we would appreciate that.
Hello, David Cranbiel, 201 Harrison. First of all, I want to, on the recent topic, it's very interesting to hear what you say, and I certainly support Doug's point that I hope we won't have a mathematical criteria system and says this is going to be funded because it's got 100 points and somebody with 80 points. I really hope we have a box that this is outside of the criteria, but you can make a proposal, because I clearly, and I think Doug's trying to say, we want to stimulate something that's out of the box. So if the criteria create a box, in my mind, that's dangerous. So we really want innovation, and I have confidence in people just evaluating what's proposed with broad, open kind of criteria or suggestions, I suppose I might say. So that's my thought. And my second thought on what you just said was I think that it's very important that since we've divided this money in half's going globally for the whole community, for regionalism, and that's great. But this half, or our fraction of the other half, is for the city itself. So I really see that money as having 90% of its impact on the city itself. So if it's got a 1/3 contribution to the city, that really should be regional, which doesn't mean we might want to pool resources if we really come up with a great idea, a huge idea, as Ted was saying. But primarily, I'd like to see this money initially being at something where 90% of the benefit is right here in town, driving revenue, as Doug pointed out, for the city. So my main point is, maybe I might run over a few minutes, but so maybe I can be the second speaker. I want to thank you for your support for this group of people that you recommended. Paul, you recommended the first 4 people. Doug, you recommended somebody. Barbara, you fired me up when we met in, I guess it was 3rd week in May, and Benny, you said you've already talked to the council or the city about this staff, and Ted, you gave me some good ideas about how it could be presented. So the main point is we do have a problem in our residential 50-year-old plus communities in that they're changing. They're being unfortunately used when we had a good idea. It's turned out it's become a vehicle for people to make a profit centers. Many of them don't even live in our city, in our residential neighborhoods where a key component is 3 unrelated people. And of course there was a history where college was rapidly expanding. There wasn't any place for students, and we all were concerned about it, and so a lot of things developed, and it was all healthy. At the moment, as you've said, Paul, we have a unique opportunity. There's going to be 600 beds for students being built over the next several years. At the moment, for the first time ever in the history of the college, according to one member of this committee that you've all recommended, who are people with talents far beyond mine, there are 200 empty, unrented rooms at the college. And there were unrented rooms at the college last year. That's never happened before. We do not have a problem with housing students. And according to the college, they're not expanding. They may expand at a half a dozen or a couple half dozens a year or whatever. And the demographics in the country are that the number of graduating high school seniors is pretty much flattening out. So we have a really unique opportunity to deal with this problem where we created an option for particularly houses, renters, many of them including out-of-state people or out-of-town people, that they could take their 4 or 5 person rental and make it legal, i.e. the 4-person option, and it had to be a certain size. Well, now what's happened when you take $750 a month rent that's standard for students, when we go from 3-person rental, okay, it's very acceptable, it's totally lawful and whatever, to a 4-person option, you increase the revenue for that for-profit person by 33%. And basically the price of the house gets $75,000 to $100,000 more than what is affordable for a person who wants to fix it up and live in it. And so basically the house that flipped over just in the recent months next to our former mayor. She told me that former mayor, that it's being rented and each room's being rented at a different rate. Well, that's obviously not a rental for a couple or two whatever. And the house just on Nelson now, for the first time, has got a rental sign on it, and it was owned and occupied by the family, and then they took it over, and it was rented by a person who lives in town here. But now, of course, it's open to the whole market. So this is not good for our community. I would like to stress that it's not good for these residential neighborhoods, which occupy, I don't know what, 50% of the housing in our town. It's also not good for downtown vibrancy, because clearly, as you've all said to me and agreed, that if you can walk downtown, I mean, you're a customer for downtown. If you can bicycle downtown, you're a prime customer. And if you can take a shorter drive to get to our downtown, then of course it's a real positive thing. And so the vibrancy in these 50-plus-year-old neighborhoods, which has been declining, as you well know, because there's people who vocally have moved out because they're kind of fed up with what's going on, is very important. And now we have a perfect time to readdress this and rejuvenate these neighborhoods. And what was been talked about is that we ask Chris and Carolyn to look at what's going on and to look at a modification of this. A modification that wouldn't affect anybody who was renting in 2010 when this ordinance was designed. In perpetuity, at some point, if you want to apply for the four-person option, fine. And we certainly wouldn't take away anything. But that we restrict it in a form similar to like the procedures that are used for the duplex situation. And what this would do would not put a ceiling on it right now, but it would put a ceiling over time on the maximum number of houses in these residential neighborhoods that could become four-person rentals. So as far as I can see, considering that with Chris and Carolyn and so forth, and with your staff, and obviously the five of you, that this could be a real plus. And with that sign, because otherwise it's financially not a good future for these streets, then I feel like these 5 people, 6, 7, 8 now, this group keeps expanding, we can build a whole lot of other options which will tie up on this, because it'll make a statement that we care about these residential neighborhoods and we want to have an appropriate mix, not an infinite mix, an ever-expanding mix of four-person rentals. And we really want to encourage and make it possible for people from anywhere, including young people, old people, retired people, newcomers, that consider buying these houses as they come up, when people who are aging and whatever and haven't done anything to the house, that it's financially possible and makes fiscal sense to buy houses in these neighborhoods. So I ask that you work with Drew and his staff to encourage them to come up with some proposals that either with 1 step or 2 steps we consider a modification to that rule. For a lot of strong support from each of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cranbill. Would anybody else like to address the council? Mr. Whitley? Dr. Whitley?
John's fine. John Whitley, 110 Governor Berkeley Road. I want to speak just for a moment about the Peninsula Agency on Aging, and to tell you that Mr. Massey is just masterful with how he administers the agency. We're so fortunate. I also want us, the city council, to look at how best we can increase our investment in PAA. We presently have a 1% sales tax that is affecting so many of our age-challenged residents, our wage-challenged residents, our housing-challenged residents, our job-challenged residents. That is, there's some way that there can be monies that can be returned to, particularly with PAA, to support its efforts. We will get more than just a $4 return on our $1 investment. Think about it, please. Mr. Massey and I will be back to you to talk a little more in detail. Secondly, I want to commend our police department for their presence with the collection of school supplies. I thought it was absolutely awesome. It shows the intent, the purpose, and the compassion that we have through the police department for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitley. Anybody else? That will close the open forum. Anything for closed session?
But nothing for closed session, but before we go, just, going back to Dr. Cranbuell, we have talked about, how ways to increase home ownership in the city and had those conversations. There are a lot of factors that influence, the number of rentals and how many people live here, and our homes priced at a point where young families and young professionals can move in. But I think there is some merit to looking into the four-person rule. And I wonder if staff couldn't take some time to kind of give us a rundown of where we're at with that, how the program's progressed, how many homes are currently taking advantage of that four-person, and whatever else you think might come up. And I'll be happy to think of some other questions that I may have and share this with you.
Have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
City Council's adjourned. We'll take a brief recess and reconvene as the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority.